Before we start the show this week, I want to tell you about a legendary new podcast coming out called Marvels, based on the infamous graphic novel by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross. It's a gritty, dramatic story that follows a photographer, student, and journalist on their mission to investigate one of the most superpowered conspiracy theories of all time. Set in New York City, the show does an incredible job of immersing you in a real-world Marvel universe and the lives of the people who inhabit it. I mean, the trailer for this is incredible. If you go over to marvelspodcast.com and check out all the information you have there, I think you'll be hooked on this. And if you decide you want to give it a listen, just go over to StitcherPremium.com and sign up with the code COMIC. That's COMIC. You'll get a free month trial of Stitcher Premium, which will let you listen to Marvels right now. That's StitcherPremium.com with the promo code COMIC. This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rappin, with two just fantastic human beings, Tia Vassiliou.
Hello.
And Nick White.
Hey.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I'm very excited to talk about comic books. I'm very excited to ask the question I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Tia.
I'm good. I finally finished my year of insane con going. And I think I'm mostly over the jet lag and general staying up all night. So I've actually been able to read some comics and recover from this whole ordeal. I don't think I'm going to do that again next year.
I mean, yeah, how many actual cons did you end up going to in 2019?
Let's see. Emerald City, C2E2, TCAF, San Diego, New York, and Thought Bubble.
Good gracious.
I know.
That makes me tired just thinking about that. And I was at two of those conventions.
Unfortunately, those were the back-to-back ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, God. Anyway, comics are good, and don't fucking pirate them, PSA.
Yes.
That's the thing that's happening on Twitter right now. I just thought I would throw that out there before we get started. If you want comics to continue being good, pay for them.
Agreed.
Yeah. Along those lines, I recently purchased a book that I have read before for free because that's my job. I originally read this book in French, but Boom is releasing Heartbeat by Maria. Her Spanish name is going to get me. It's the 2L, so I don't know if it's Llovett or if you say the L. We should look into this for our database.
Agreed.
She works a lot with Brian Azzarello too on creator-owned books. So, you might have seen her work. It's very erotic and sexy and beautiful. The line work is really dynamic and sort of sketchy isn't the right word for it because it's really well put together, but it's very like the dynamism. When I say dynamic, like there's a lot of movement to her line work, and there's like a pretty evident manga influence in her work, but it isn't manga style. It's definitely like her own style. I would compare her to maybe Tula Lotay or Joelle Jones in terms of like everyone in her book is hot, but like beautiful.
I mean, yes.
Yeah. And I know I've actually talked about Heartbeat before when I read it in French, and I was like, everyone needs to read this even if you can't read French, because like the story is so good and the art is so good that you still get the story even if you can't understand the dialogue necessarily. And I'm really actually excited to read it in English and then compare it to the French, which the French is also a translation. I think it was originally published in Spanish. But basically the story is about a girl who, her mom is kind of a mess and they don't have a lot of money. And one of the families that her mom is a maid for somehow arranged to help this girl go to the fancy prep school that their kids go to. But everyone at the school is like an asshole to her and bullies her, and she's kind of an outsider. And then in the first issue, I hesitate to use the word meets, she encounters this guy at the school holding the the dead and bloodied body of one of her classmates.
What?
Yeah.
That's a bit of a jump.
One of the perils of public schools, guys. Come on.
And she's really obsessed with death, and she's very miserable, right, with her life, and she's very intrigued by this guy. And she, in later issues, because I've read it, I'll explain without spoiling, like, she does get more involved with him, and a lot of the artwork, and you might have seen some of the preview art, like, it's implied that he drinks the blood. So,
okay.
Yeah, like, I don't know how to really describe it. It's like Twilight, but really, really sexy and violent. And also, like, there's a twist to the whole drinking the blood thing.
Sure. I mean, I was going to ask, how do you get sexier than Twilight? But if you say it's possible.
Oh, Michael.
Still, this looks beautiful. I've seen some preview pages of this.
I absolutely love this book. I have been standing this book, in other languages, and so shout out to Boom for bringing it to us in English. And I'm like really bummed that they're doing it by issue instead of as a trade, because when I initially read it, it was as a trade, and I was like, because I really want to talk to people about the twist, and I don't want to spoil it for them. So the struggle is real.
So what you're saying is that we have no excuse now but to read this book.
Please
because
read
now
this
it's
book.
in English.
Do it for me.
That is 2020's goal. Everyone's going to read Heartbeat. That's what I'm saying.
That'll be my contribution to the reading challenge.
I love it. That sounds perfect, because I want to talk about a book that's part of the Goodreads group today too. So, but before I get to that, Nick, let's move on to you. How have you been? How have comic books been? Tell us something.
Good. I'm good. I'm tired. The last day or two have been pretty jam-packed, as it's been sort of a full court press. That's sports talk for a lot of work, just trying to get some applications done. And then yesterday, attending my dad's mandolin concert. He's in a mandolin orchestra. If you don't know what that sounds like, it's like imagine one mandolin and then imagine that there's more of them. That's it.
I actually am really into Joseph Van Wisdom, I think is how you say his name.
I wouldn't know. You can probably tell that I'm already not steeped in this world.
Anyway, your dad is cool.
Yes, Nick, your dad is cool.
I know, I'm a terrible son.
He did the music for Only Lovers Left Alive.
Mm-hmm.
Nick!
What's that?
Oh my god, never mind. It's a vampire movie. What's that? Jim Jarmusch. It's a Jim Jarmusch vampire movie.
Oh, this is the Driver one, isn't it?
No, it's the one where Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston play like sexy vampires with ennui.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
See, you're digging too deep into the culture hole. You've lost me a long time ago. Mandolins,
yes. So, that's been going on. I have managed to get some reading done, and in addition to what Tia said earlier, of course, pay for your books. If you can't pay for your books, go to your local library and you'll find something absolutely weird on the shelf. I think in the past I've talked about how Spring Lakes Library is kind of guilty of basically, in the quote-unquote adult graphic novel section, it's just basically quote-unquote the hits as it goes. Like, there's Watchmen, there's Mouse, there's Fun Home, but beyond that, it doesn't really move beyond the ones that have won lots of awards, which, not to knock award granting places, whatever. But I did find a rather weird book there last time I was in there called The Ballad of Halo Jones. This was written by Alan Moore and drawn by Ian Gibson, with colors by Barbara Nocenzo. But the colors were done after the fact for the collection, because it was originally published for 2000 AD in 1984. So it actually I'm pretty sure that predates pretty much all of Moore's big hits as they go. I'd never heard of this before. When I asked Paul about it, this was something that was completely foreign to him too. So, I don't know. Neil Gaiman said it's great, but he'll pretty much vouch for, like, I mean, I'm pretty sure I've gotten a Neil Gaiman pull quote on something I've written at one point. Like one of my high school essays, I just called up Neil and I was like, what do you think about Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart? He's like, your essay's perfect. I'll send you a quote.
Perfect.
So anyway, Nick White calling out Neil Gaiman for being a shill. There we go. This is from Alan Moore's introduction to the book. I loved this so much that I just have to read this. This is when it was collected 2 years after it came out. He wrote, "There were those readers who complained very little happened in the strip. Personally, I think what they actually meant was that very little violence happened in the strip. But then it was their 24p a week, and they have every right to be bored if they damn well want to be." For those not aware, 24p is like cents in pounds. So yeah, I really liked that. This book is science fiction. It follows this woman named Halo Jones. And it basically is that we've seen this narrative structure recently of just someone living a very normal everyday, or just trying to live a very normal everyday life while living amidst this like big epic galactic structure going on around them, right? We've kind of seen things like Hitchhiker's Guide kind of riff on this as well, but this was actually, I think Hitchhiker would have been around the same time. So anyway, it's very Alan Moore, and I think that's kind of a warning. It drops you in media res. It's a very realized world of Moore's. It's just littered with lingo and jargon. Mm-hmm. He invented a language for it. It's Alan Moore. What do you expect? All of this is going to happen, right? But he's very much trying to ground the character in just everyday life. Halo does a lot of things that you and I would do. You go out on a Saturday night to watch your friend's band play. You go shopping, except that when you live in the Hoop, which is where they live, even shopping is a struggle and dangerous, and going out into the streets can be kind of a dangerous thing to do, which is why they're called shopping expeditions.
Oh, brother. Taking like the idea of like mass capitalism or consumerism in the 80s and making it into like an Indiana Jones style adventure. That's what I'm hearing.
Right. And so you don't go out unarmed. You got to bring your Zenades, which explode and then turn the target into a state of euphoric bliss from which they can't like come out of. Or you bring your Sput stick, which seems like the Minority Report sick stick. So I don't know Philip K. Dick. I don't know who needs to be going after who, although Philip's dead, so he's not going to go after Alan Moore. Maybe Alan Moore can, like, curse his ghost. I don't know.
Alan Moore wants to be dead. It's fine,
It's
Nick.
really bold of you, Nick, to assume that ghosts don't go after anybody. Like, what horror movies are you watching?
Especially in the UK, Nick. Come on.
This
I'm
is
a
true.
ghost. I guess that's just it for me.
But yeah, I mean, you have to go out shopping because how else are you going to get your hands on, well, their shopping list was a Ghost Toast, Kriskies, a Plasbulb of Ulcerhythm, and a drum of Nullcept, or as I call it, Alan Moore's Postmates order of street drugs.
Yeah, that's what that sounds like.
So, really weird, but I like it so far. It's kind of odd to have 2000 AD strips kind of collected because they're all very short. And the trade by that reason is also very short. So, but I enjoyed it. I've got the other volumes at home, so we'll see how it goes. It's fine. It's fine. For me, it's fine. Alan Moore for me is always great. I realize some people love to put him on the pedestal and other people love to set the pedestal on fire, assuming it's flammable, I suppose. For me, Alan Moore's good, B+, whatever. Briefly, I just wanted to say I also read Motor Crush Volume 1, Brendan Fletcher, Cameron Stewart writing, Babs Tarr on art. I know, Nick White, it's not, don't adjust your dials, folks. It is 2019. I am getting around to it now. I just want to say, really enjoyed this book. If you somehow are allergic to the color pink, don't pick this up. Because boy howdy.
And also get help.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I do want to say the one thing I thoroughly enjoyed about this book is as I'm reading like these World Grand Prix in-world captions, all of the different graphics for the broadcasts and the different drivers and the race and like the projections, it looks straight out of like an actual like F1 race or a video game. And I was like, oh man, these are just perfect and they're so sharp. And sure enough, it was designed by Tom Muller. If you don't know who Muller is, he did the cover art and the cover dress for Bloodshot Salvation. He created the X and the new logos for Hoxpox. Those are all his work, those kind of diamondy X's.
Cool.
Yeah, he did the cover designs for Drifter, where it's got kind of those Ben-Day dot design setup. Mm-hmm. Like, design is the new coloring, people. Like, if the complaint of the last couple of years was like coloring isn't getting enough credit and it needs to get more credit, design for me is like right there. Like that's...
Letterers have entered the chat.
Yeah, letterers, flatterers have entered the chat as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna get the other communities coming after me for sure, but like design needs more respect.
Yeah, I think logo design is crucial.
I feel like a lot of the books I read credit their designers and hype them on Twitter and stuff like that. So, it's like it's getting there.
Definitely.
I thoroughly enjoyed the book. It's a mystery of why is a human being drinking an illegal fluid meant for cars? That's basically the mystery of this book. Why is a human being drinking NOS and not the energy drink? Although it's also a valid question to ask, why are human beings drinking the energy drink NOS?
Right.
That's also
Michael,
true.
could you please speak for your people?
Mike's is this an attack?
Let's move on. Let me talk about books that no. So, actually, I will say, I have actually not had an energy drink in probably 7 or 8 months, because I went to the doctor and he said, you better stop. And I said,
Mike went to the doctor and the doctor said,
he said, you better stop. And I was like, yeah, right. And he's like, no, but really. And I said, okay, cool. All right, cool. And so I have it.
So I grabbed my skateboard
bit.
and flew out of there.
Like, yeah, I definitely felt like a moment of like, doctors don't know anything they're talking about. And then he showed me like a chart and I said, you maybe know what you're talking about. So I actually haven't had an energy drink in a while. So for me, I actually been reading a handful of comics. I did read Rye #1 really quick. Juan Jose Rip's art just makes me sick with glee. Like, it was more than what I expected, and the story was fantastic. I'm really excited to hear what Nick has to say when he finally picks this up at the library or something. Because holy smokes, it's Rye to the extreme, and I really enjoyed that. Something happened, I guess, recently, this Fallen World thing that I haven't read yet. So I think I should go back and read those issues. But regardless, this first issue was fantastic. But the book I do want to talk about really quick is Arab of the Future, A Childhood in the Middle East, 1978 to 1984, a graphic memoir. The title is a mouthful, but it is a wonderful book. I'm still reading it. This is by Riyad Sattouf. It's a book about basically this guy's life as he grew up as a French Syrian child who moved to Libya, then to Syria, then back to France. And it's the story of him dealing essentially with dictators from a child's perspective. And not that he himself is dealing with it, but he's basically seeing all the adults in the world around him change as him and his family move around the world, and they have to live in the politics of the time. So the book opens with him and his family moving from France to Libya right as Gaddafi is taking over, and how some of the people in Libya really, really loved Gaddafi, and for many, many years did, because of the way that he changed their state with essentially a non-violent coup. And again, this is about as far as I've gotten in the book. It's like the first chapter or two. But I really, really enjoyed this. And I'm kind of kicking myself for having started reading it like super late last night, because I really couldn't put it down. But then suddenly it was 2 a.m. and I was like, I need to go to sleep. So I'm looking forward to finishing this book tonight after the show and talking about it on Goodreads, because it is the Goodreads book of the month for our Goodreads group. And if you haven't had a chance to jump in on that, you totally should, because it's a fantastic place to go and talk about comics. But like, this book is fucking incredible. So I really highly suggest this to people, because boy, oh boy, just the first chapter and a half like really struck me. And I think if you like nonfiction comics, because that was the theme this month, a lot of the books that we picked were really, really good. And I was bummed that they didn't, like the book that I suggested didn't get picked, but Man, I'm so glad this one won because it's incredible. Nonfiction comics are fucking amazing. So I don't know. Really go read this one. But let's move on. Let's talk about comics that are coming out in the upcoming week. Comic books are dropping on November 27th, 2019. What are you guys talking about? Nick, I'm throwing it back to you.
Sure. So for me, it's going to be I'll try that again. So for me, it's going to be Witchfinder Omnibus Volume 1. For those unaware, this is a book within the Mignola-verse, as I've coined it. It's written by Mike Mignola and John Arcudi, and it's drawn by Ben Stenbeck, Tyler Crook, John Severin, who's actually the late brother of Marie Severin, and colors, of course, are done by Dave Stewart. I've read probably about half of the book's content before. For me, it's actually one of my more favorite books within the Mignola-verse, honestly. It's kind of got a little bit of everything. For me, all of the Mignola books are basically delivering horror, but it's kind of horror with a slapdash of something extra. So if you want a teen book, it's BPRD. If you want a mopey sad sack emo amphibian, it's Abe Sapien. If you want a war book, it's Sledgehammer 44. But if you want kind of a Victorian era mystery, then Witchfinder would be an excellent book to go with. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Ben Stenbeck has pretty much drawn everything for Mignola, from Baltimore to Lobster Johnson to Frankenstein Underground, and this too. I think, honestly, Mike Mignola has a Misery-esque sort of situation going, and Ben Stenbeck is chained to a desk somewhere in, like, the woods of Maine, where he's forced to draw comic books for Mike Mignola.
Oh, jeez.
That's just that's my understanding, because when you look at his comic book DB page, it's like, when do you have a free second? I don't know.
R.I.P. Comic Book DB.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad someone else went there, because that's where I was going to go. I love that website. My life will be a mess on December 16th because of that. So, who knows what's going to happen from that. But if you like Hellboy, but you want a Victorian era flavored mystery take on Hellboy, this would be an excellent book. And the other thing I really love about it is that the ways in which they weave Witchfinder in and out of the other Hellboy books, especially because it takes place so much earlier, the ways in which they've creatively wove it in and out has been fantastic. So definitely check this book out.
Very cool. What about you, Tia? What are you excited for this week?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Curse Words is ending.
My heart. It's broken.
This is If You Live Under a Rock, art by Ryan Brown and written by Charles Soule.
No, you have to read it like you put it in the notes.
Well, it's not like we're friends or anything. I don't like know the man personally. I did interview him once, I guess, but that's not even nearly the same thing. I don't know if he goes by Chucky Soule, but in my heart, he's Chucky Soule.
Oh, I see. That's what you have in the notes. I just was, I wanted you to say it. That's all.
Yeah, no, I interviewed him at New York Comic Con when it was going to be announced, or it was just coming out, and they were having like a wizard party at the Image party where everyone was going to wear a beard.
Yep, that sounds right.
Yeah. Oh, memories. Anyway, now it's ending. And I'm not caught up at all, so I am going to take this opportunity to get caught up, because I was actually thinking recently how much Wizard reminds me of Michael from The Good Place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I really like that comparison a lot,
right?
actually.
And so The Good Place is also ending, because like everything you love dies. So yeah, I feel like, it's a good time to catch up and see how they wrap up that book, because I really loved it when I know that it's better to buy floppies, but I really do prefer trades. I like waiting till I like reading full series like completed things. Just so.
Yeah, I'm a couple issues behind on this too. I think maybe 5 or 6, so more than a couple. But that's I didn't know that this book was any. Again, this is the problem when you don't study previews like it's your job anymore. Is you kind of find these things out really suddenly. And yeah, I mean, regardless, I think like having a definite end for this book, though, will actually be good, because I have a feeling that Ryan Brown and Charles Soule aren't just like ending this abruptly. I'm guessing that it's coming to a natural conclusion. So
yeah, and I think it's like number 44 or 45. Like it was that's a solid,
it's quite a run.
Yeah,
that's yeah, yowza. Well, I'll guess I'm looking forward to that too. I guess I didn't even realize. For some reason, it's not on my pull list on League of Comic Geeks. I'm gonna have a word with the internet after this, but
here's a
let me talk about the book that I'm excited for this week. Really, my pick is actually X-Force number 2, but I'm not going to spoil anything. So let me talk about a book that I'm excited about because I love having my heart broken as well. And this is John Constantine, the Hellblazer number 1. By Cy Spurrier, Aaron Campbell on art. I'm tempted by this book. Like, I really want to buy this, but DC's gone through so many fast iterations of John Constantine, and they really don't know what they're doing. Like, you can hear Nick groaning in the background for the right reason, because I think in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had 4 different Constantine books by various names, like Constantine the Hellblazer, John Constantine, the Hellblazer, John Constantine, Electric Boogaloo. You know, like, they don't know what they're doing. And I really love the run that was by Ming Doyle and James Tynion with Riley Rossmo on art. Like, that book I still champion to this day because it's a wonderful, wonderful story about John Constantine coming to terms with himself, about his like ability to love, and I really, really enjoyed that. And then the follow-up series was just like back to basics. John Constantine has to deal with the weird side of DC Comics, and everyone's like, John Constantine, you're such a rebel. And he's like, you know, mate, and he lights a cigarette, I don't smoke anymore. And it turns out it's like a candy cane. I don't know. Like, that's the way that DC was pitching that character afterwards, and it was kind of a bummer. So hopefully with Cy Spurrier at the helm, this book will be worthwhile. I don't know. I'm gonna try picking up the first one. I like Cy Spurrier as a writer. I know he doesn't have a perfect track record, but I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff that he's done in the past. So it'll be interesting to see someone like him take on this book, because I feel like he has that vibe that you get from a lot of British writers who take on weird characters like John Constantine. I think he's done similar things like that. So fingers crossed, I guess. I'm gonna try this. I don't know.
Aaron Campbell's a really underrated artist too, so it'll be nice to see him on the book. I really like his work on Uncanny.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I'm very excited for that reason as well. So we'll see how things go. But we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about it's a strange topic. I'll just say that. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. We're just going to take a break, and you're going to have to find out. Before we get back to the show, I have to tell you about this new podcast that Marvel just dropped, all about the Fantastic Four. And it's based on the infamous series Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross. It's by the same people who created the excellent Wolverine podcast, and it goes into the story all about the Fantastic Four's first encounter with Galactus and his herald, the Mighty Silver Surfer. I've checked this out. I listened to an episode or two, and the trailer, if you just go listen to the trailer, I think you'll understand that this show is amazing. I was going to say fantastic, but, I can't throw that many puns at you. So if you want to learn more about Marvels, go over to marvelspodcast.com. And if you're interested in listening to the actual podcast, head over to StitcherPremium.com and sign up with the code COMIC, COMIC. You'll get a free month trial of Stitcher Premium, which will let you listen to Marvels right now. That's StitcherPremium.com with the promo code COMIC. For our show this week, our topic is a little strange. Well, I don't know why I think it's strange, but for some reason, asking someone who's your favorite comic book creator is a little odd. But I think that I have 2 people on the show this week that I can easily ask that question because I know that they have answers. So with the actual topic itself being first exposure, what was your first comic you read by your favorite creator or creative team, and how do you see that series now? I have a bunch of follow-up questions to that, but I think we maybe know some of the answers to these. Tia's, I think we all know, but Nick, I want to hear from you first about, what's your favorite comic, or what's the first comic that you've read from your favorite creative team? What's on your list?
Yeah, well, I just want to say up front, like, I want to thank Mike for posing like an awful, like, for an indecisive person. This is just this is torture.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cause it's not only is it like, well, who's your favorite? Which of course, like, don't get me started. That's terrible. Don't make people choose. But then it's like, hey, can you remember the first comic you read by that person? So then it turns into this, like, how good is your memory? Because like, it's I feel like basically this question should be on an ARP memory exam, more or less.
Nick, by episode 300, I plan to break you. I just want you to know that.
Yeah. So what's funny is I started reading Animal Man because I was thinking, well, that's the first book I've read by Jeff Lemire, and maybe about an issue in, I thought a little bit deeper, and then I was like, shit, that's wrong. The first Lemire book I ever read was actually Kid Eternity #1, which was a one-shot that he did for DC with Cully Hamner on art. And full credit to Xander, because Xander is actually the person who got this for me. He was at Tardy's and he said, can I grab some comics for you? And I said, just pick some things out. And so he basically did a grab bag of books, and it was Kid Eternity, and it was also the French comic 13 #1, and that's also become one of my favorites. But it was a weird book because I remember so DC owns this National Comics imprint, and they did this series of one-shots, Kid Eternity being one of them, others being Looker, Madamax, Rose and Thorn. And the idea was that they were going to use these one-shots to have them as entry points to inject new characters into the New 52, which sounds great, except I don't think any of these characters saw the light of day after their one-shot.
I was going to say, none of these names sound familiar to me.
That's right. That's right. We never saw any of them again, which was a tragedy because I really enjoyed Kid Eternity, and it was. This is interesting as well. Was Lemire reviving a Morrison character? So I suppose it's appropriate enough that the book I ended up reading was Animal Man, which is once again Jeff Lemire reviving a Grant Morrison character. Right. Let me be clear. I know that Grant Morrison did not create the character, but Lemire was building on a lot of the character that Morrison had built up specifically. So it was interesting to return to that book. It was basically me having a lot of, I totally forgot that this happens in this book moments, which is, again, not really reassuring for someone's memory. When I was done with this, I immediately downloaded the Lumosity app because, like, I don't have much more to lose at this point. Like,
right.
I gotta master tile matching and things like that.
Well, given the number of comics and stories and, just massive numbers of words that we take in, it's not really something you can expect to do. You can't really expect to remember every single thing that you read, 5+ years ago. I think that's okay. It's fine.
Yeah, that's what a fake fan would say, Michael. So I'm glad that someone's...
Right.
No, I'm just kidding. Everybody.
I know. I get you. But I mean, just really quick. I mean, Tia, let's jump over to you. I mean, because Nick, it sounds to me like Animal Man was really the book that kind of set you on the path of let's just keep reading Jeff Lemire books until the day that I die. Whereas Tia, like, what was the book that really got you into your creative team love?
Well, I read Journey in a Mystery, which got me hooked on Kieran's writing. Mm-hmm. And then because Young Avengers is sort of the next logical book to read in the Loki story from there, that's what introduced me to Jamie. And then I realized that they were like comics married and had other work together, like Phonogram. And also Phonogram was like all the things for me, like all the music that I liked and like weird magic stuff and like just kind of an enigmatic story. And I was just like, oh yes, my people, I have found you.
and since then you were just hooked, right? I mean, is there a Gillen book that you haven't tried yet, or a Jamie and Kieran book? I think after all the Phonogram stuff, they just did Wicked and Divine for 5 years straight. So I don't think there was really anything else to try by the both of them.
Jamie, I think, has done some other Marvel work that I haven't read. I want to say it's X-Men of some kind, perhaps.
Could be.
I forget. And I also did not read Kieran's Iron Man. I just don't care about Iron Man. And
Hot takes. Kieran, did you hear that?
I mean,
Kevin Feige is on a helicopter right now coming to you.
If Kieran couldn't make me, and I even bought all of them. I remember, like, this was back when I was just, like, new to comics, and I would go on Comixology, and this was, I think, also during in-app purchases, and they were like, hey, do you want to buy every issue of this run of Iron Man? And I was like, yep, sure, lay it on me. And I would literally just, like, you know, be laying in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning being like, add 50 books to cart, why not? And
I mean, I've been there. I remember those days. They were not good days for my wallet.
And I don't even think I read all of them because I was just like, oh, Iron Man, yeah, you're you. Okay. And I also did, like, I've read some Uber, but it's just, like, not my genre.
It's war porn to a certain extent. I get that.
But as a team, I've read all their stuff.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, it's interesting. So I guess, like, that you do bring up an interesting point here, Tia, that, like, yes, you may have, like, a creator that you go to for anything. You'll maybe try one issue of something that they do, even if it's not your bag, such as an Iron Man. Nick, I'm curious to know, you know, do you have that with Jeff? We can get to whatever my pick is, because I had the same level of indecision. I realized that the creator that I always try the number ones for is Ed Brubaker, and mostly because I read Sleepless when I was really first getting into comics beyond just Big Two stuff, and I read Sleeper, which is the crime noir superhero story that was published by Wildstorm, so it was like a DC book before it was fully DC. I don't know. But I got into that, and ever since then, I've tried every single Brubaker and Phillips book that's come out. And I should say I've read or owned them all in some capacity, because they're like my Kieran and Jamie to a certain extent, where it's just like, oh, they have a book coming out. That's what I'm buying. But this going back to my original question, just to get my answer out of the way, is there a book that, you know, you've picked up by, or you haven't picked up by Lemire, even though you're like, I really want to read everything that this guy does, but you just weren't turned on to it for some reason?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. He definitely has a clunker, and its name is Justice League United.
Oh, okay. What didn't work for you in that book?
Oh man, I think a lot of it, to be fair, was DC editorial. DC editorial was not great during the New 52, but I think it was even worse towards the beginning. And this was a few years in, and the whole conceit of the book was supposed to be that it was going to be Justice League, but much like Jeff Lemire, it was going to be Canadian flavored, and that it was also going to go into space. And yeah, those two don't really seem mutual, considering one's extraterrestrial and the other's not. But it was Jeff Lemire, and I thought I was going to have my maple syrup and eat it too, or something else that's Canadian, I guess poutine. And something happened. There was some shit went down in editorial, and editorial was like, no, this shit's going to space and space alone. And so the Canada stuff, which really sucked, because he created a new character. Her name was Equinox, and she was a Native American character. Although I think in Canada, don't they say Native peoples? Anyway,
probably.
Yeah. And so
I love
that
how you
was
couldn't
good.
even say Canada, much less the right term for the Indigenous people of Canada.
That's exactly.
Listen, people in Michigan have a real hard time talking about Canada, because it's like talking about a cousin
right.
that like lived at your house for a long time.
And so that was going to be awesome, and they created he created this new character, and he did a lot of focus testing with the character with individuals up in Canada, and it was going to be awesome. And then they were like, no, just space, and it wasn't enjoyable. There were some major art issues on that book. It was just rotating through artist after artist after artist. And, I mean, Jeff Lemire is kind of one of those writers who at this point is sort of like, he has, as I've talked about before, for better or for worse, he has like 7 people in his Rolodex, and that's it. And, so normally when he does a project, it's one of those 7 people. Mm-hmm. And you could tell that like DC editorial control was like, we're putting out this book like every month, no delays. And so we had books where there were 2 artists sharing the book, and it was very not Lemire. It was bad. I think I'm having flashbacks right now.
Did you pick up that whole run or something? I mean,
sounds like... Of course. I gotta support Jeffy through the tough times.
I see. Interesting. But I guess so. With holy smokes, let me just start my whole brain over.
That's fine.
So the question that I guess I want to get to next is, what keeps you coming back to these creators? Because I know, for instance, like for me, with Brubaker and Phillips, they're my go-to because I know with their comics, I know exactly what I'm getting, which is going to be some sort of crime spy story. And for some reason, I feel like a 55-year-old man who sits in his lazy boy, smokes a cigar, and has a thing of whiskey. Yeah. Instead of reading Tom Clancy, I'm reading something by Brubaker and Phillips, and it's some sort of crime noir story over and over, and it's consistent and interesting every single time, even if something like Criminal is always about like the same 9 characters trying to rob the same banks and getting shot 100 times over. I find those books really interesting and something really fun and easy to come back to. I know that like with every book that they've done, like Incognito or Sleeper, for instance, you get like this twist on something that you kind of already understand. So for Incognito, for those of you who maybe didn't read it, it's another superhero kind of noir story, but the superheroics are a bit more like explosive and like world ending compared to something like Sleeper, where there's like a conspiracy on top of a like a James Bond style thing where someone's infiltrating a company, and are they like working for both sides, or are they just working for themselves? There's all these questions around it, and that's what makes the book really interesting. I don't know if you guys have that, like, that there's a consistent thing about these creators that you're going to get out of their books, even when there are clunkers. Like Nick, for instance, you were saying with Justice League United, you knew like the really cool twist on this book was that Lemire was doing all this stuff in Canada and stuff, and that's what drew you to the book. But is there something about these creators that always bring you to their books, or you hope to get out of their books whenever you read them? And I realize I'm asking a very long question, but that's kind of the simplified version. So Tia, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I feel like in terms of just like thematic interests and cultural references and interests, just like as a general aesthetic, and they're a creative team that probably has the same sort of DNA as me. Like the things that I want to read about, the questions that I'm interested in exploring, and the stories that I'm interested in, like they're also interested in them, and they're making them, So it's like I pretty much can trust that it'll be anything that I pick. I mean, I guess they're like with the work for hire, like sometimes, it is what it is. Like I'm never going to really be that interested in Iron Man, but, like on the whole, it's just sort of like people who are speaking my language.
Right.
I guess
right.
That's
even
the way to put it.
Like, yeah, even with something like Young Avengers, for instance, like there was still, I think there was a lot more freedom in that book. I mean, saying, given that I've read it, for them to try a bunch of stuff and add references where they wanted. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, they've said that they approached that book as though it were creator owned.
Yeah. I think that definitely comes through, especially in the end of that book.
People think it got canceled. It didn't. That was their plan.
I love that because it does feel like it got canceled and that they got to kind of go out on a middle finger, kind of like what was it, the Angela book that came out?
Oh God! But except that was a tire like that did not stick its landing. The Angela book,
right? Totally. I mean, but like even then, if Young Avengers was quote unquote canceled, like they went out on a really good note, and the fact that they didn't is actually awesome because it feels like a cancellation, but it was actually like a true ending. It's like the best of both worlds, I guess, for Marvel and the fans.
Yeah, I
don't know. What about you, Nick? What drives you back to Jeff Lemire's books over and over?
The unrelenting melancholy.
Could you elaborate, please?
Just sad boys being sad boys, basically.
Sure.
I think that's probably why it was so hard to pick between Jeff Lemire and Matt Kindt, because like when their powers unite, I am Captain Sadness. It's just people being depressed all the time. I mean, all joking aside, obviously I think both Lemire and Kindt have sort of figured out how to. I mean, their books are very feelings oriented, I guess is another way of putting it. You feel for these characters, whether it's Sweet Tooth or Essex County, which like Essex County is a book like you need to cut with another book because it's just too strong. Like you need to dilute it, right? I think that the sadness and the hockey and the maple syrup and everything just gets to you. But what's interesting is that like in terms of Animal Man, boy, that book was so much wordier than I remember it being. And again, I think some of that was obviously, I think, Jeff growing as a writer, and I think some of it was DC editorial control being like, we need more of an internal monologue and a much longer one. In some ways, I kind of wonder if like my memory is kind of pulling a Rambo or a Terminator effect, where you like the second volume or the third volume in a series gets so popular or whatever that you sort of tend to forget that things happened in the first one that maybe didn't quite jive with the other ones, if that makes sense. Sure. So you just kind of like, because people just forget First Blood is a totally different movie than the rest of the series, and in some ways I think that's maybe what happened with me in Animal Man. And I just want to say before anyone like loses their shit, like, yes, I realize Lemire Sorrentino hasn't been brought up until this very moment. Obviously, I love Andrea Sorrentino very much. I just was a little hesitant to bring that up because I didn't really follow them when they were over at Marvel. I mean, I can speak to the first book I read of theirs, which was Green Arrow. Sorrentino had previously done I, Vampire, but that was with Joshua Hale Fialkov. So that was his previous DC work. And I think looking back on that, even because I reread it last year, for example, it really just goes to show you sometimes how different and transformed one's pencils can be when you switch from a really like long time coloring partner to a different colorist. Because they worked with Marcelo Maiolo when they were at DC, and I think he even followed them over to Marvel for Old Man Logan. But then Gideon Falls is Dave Stewart, and it almost took me a while, I don't know about you, just to adjust to Sorrentino's pencils in Gideon Falls, because they seemed much more, I don't know, like you could physically see all of the pen strokes much easier. Yeah. I think Stewart kind of was putting flat colors on it, and Maiolo was sort of just kind of coloring over it and sometimes covering it up. So,
yeah, I mean, and I think that might be more of a big two choice versus in the independent book choice, which is interesting. I think what you're saying here is that in 2020 we've got to get you reading Old Man Logan so you can complete this journey between Lemire and Sorrentino as they bounced around before Gideon Falls. I mean, I think that's like 8 trades or something of Old Man Logan we've got to get you into.
Let's just upset another community here, and I'll just say it, like, I don't want to read a Wolverine book.
Listen, Nick,
I'm sorry, guys.
You need to stop being so close-minded. That's all I'm saying. We're going to get Tia to read these Iron Man comics. You're going to be reading Old Man Logan. And eventually, everyone's going to be on the X-Men train. That's what I'm aiming for.
I was going to say, there's a big picture here, of course. There is.
So let me ask you guys another question here. So have you been able to get other people into these like original series that got you really hooked on these creative teams or this like a specific creator? Like, do you look back at the book that really got you into a specific creator and said, hey, I'm going to give this to you. And I think that with this book, it's going to, convince you that this is the team that you should read. Have you guys approached anything like that before?
I mean, I think that Gillen and McKelvey are doing fine.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, not for the sake of like helping the creators out, but just to like have another friend of yours maybe reading those books if they hadn't tried them before.
I mean, I actually don't know anyone who's needed me to convince them to read Young Avengers. I can't lie.
True. Okay, I get that. Well, Nick, here's the question: have you read Wicked and Divine? Because I think we've got a book for you.
Oh man, like. That book is one of those books for me where I feel like there's so much, and hype is the wrong word because when people use hype, people think, well, maybe it's undeserved, right? There's so much praise for that book, and there's so much, I feel like it's like a insurmountable tower, of something that I'm like haven't even touched at all yet, right? And so for me, it's like, I feel like I'm going to either A, have to climb all the way to the top of the tower and explore everything that's there, or just let it be, because it's all or nothing, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, just
pull quote Nick White.
Start at one and keep reading.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think, though, to Tia's point before about Phonogram, I think that you might dig that, given your music taste. I think that you would dig that book, really.
And also just its general pretentiousness is very up your alley.
I don't think that we're saying that you're pretentious.
No,
that's fine. Go ahead.
But I know that you tend to, like, I feel like Nick really likes a complicated book or an enigmatic book that doesn't give you everything.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. I hear you there.
Yeah, I really do think you would enjoy that book. And of course, now that we've suggested it multiple times, Nick will put it off for 2 to 3 years, then get back to it.
When you're ready, Nick, we'll do the mini-sode in 2023.
I love that, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the next decade, yeah.
But yeah, Nick, have you been able to convince people to read more of like Lemire's work, or stuff just by handing over a volume? And I don't count because I will read anything if anyone's excited about it. So other than me, have you convinced someone to read like Animal Man?
Just broad horizons forever, Mike Rappin. That's right.
I mean, for the most part, I don't see a reason to not read any comic if someone is excited about it, and then tell them whether or not you liked it. Because most comics, you can at least try. Anyway, but that's a whole other thing.
Other Lemire works, yes. I think Animal Man has been really hard, and it's not because of the character, it's not because it's a DC comic, it's not because of the writing, it's that Travel Foreman's art is so fucking polarizing.
Absolutely.
It is really hard to sell people on that. Even the people that are like, you know what, if the writing's good and the art neither attracts nor repulses me, I'll read it. Even those people that are like, passable art would be fine. They won't read this book.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a little off-putting. I will admit that it's definitely like, wow, there's a lot of very small lines for things.
There's so much body horror.
Yeah, it's all like nearing body horror in just some of the weird ways that he draws things, especially in the moments where there are actual horror elements in the book. I totally get that.
And of course, the problem is that he's so good at drawing that stuff, and the converse is that his people don't always really, like, there can be glaringly weird things going on there. But,
Totally.
I mean, his other stuff, yeah, I think his Green Arrow run is still one of the most interesting, like, considering what was going on in terms of the New 52 and in terms of DC editorial, and in terms of like the house style, right, that was going on. it's such a great book in that sense because it really, just kind of breaks the mold, I guess you could say.
And this is the Lemire Sorrentino, like volume 4 of the New 52 that you're talking about?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, the panel layouts are crazy. The color choices are just unbelievable. It really felt like you were getting an Image book at DC. Like, for me, that was kind of the vibe, which is, I mean, especially at that time, was super fucking rare.
Gotcha.
So,
and have you been able to, like, pitch that to people and get them on board for Green Arrow? Because, I mean, in general, to me, Green Arrow seems like a character that's hard to get into. For as someone who's, like, not read a lot of DC comics, have you been able to get other folks into that?
Well, I think the TV show has obviously raised a certain level of visibility, which has helped.
Sure.
And then I think beyond that, people who have dipped their toes in Lemire kind of understand that he's very comfortable with taking B-level heroes, C-level heroes, and telling tales about them more so than Batman or Superman or characters like that. So it's kind of been his niche.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of my take on that for sure. Whereas like Matt Kint is a tricky one too, because Matt Kint's art is also pretty polarizing stuff.
Totally. And especially since a lot of his work is just him doing the writing and the art.
Yeah, like Department H and Mind Management and the like, which is too bad because those are some of his most interesting works, and certainly in some ways some of his more convoluted and complicated ones. So yeah, that gets tricky as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like I've been able to just hand people Sleeper and tell them, hey, it's a noir story about superheroes, and then they go, there's only 24 issues of this, and I said, yep, that's it, I'm sorry, and then I get in a fist fight with them. So I can't do anything about it, but that's all I can say. That I don't know. I guess I had one last question. I guess, like, what was the thing that got you really hooked on these books? We kind of already talked about it. So I don't know. Do you guys have any final thoughts about getting these comic book creators getting you, I guess, really hooked into comics? They become your favorite people that you're basically going to try anything that they put out, at least the first issue. Any final thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, Mike, I was going to ask you, because I saw it in your notes. Do you want to speak to some of your backups or other favorite teams or authors or things that you...
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I had listed that, basically I read Invincible, and it really showed me that there was more to comics than just the big two. And ever since then, I've always tried everything that Ryan Ottley and Robert Kirkman have done. I mean, Ottley hasn't obviously done a whole lot outside of Invincible. I know he's on Amazing Spider-Man, and I tried that, and I forgot that Spider-Man is great, but I can't keep up with that many comics. And so, I'll maybe one day read it all in trade or something, because I love Ottley's art, and I think going from Invincible to Spider-Man was a natural fit for him. He's born to draw a certain style of superhero comics, and I think Spider-Man fits that. I wouldn't say that he would fit a Batman or even an Iron Man or a Thor or something like that, or Superman. Superman probably, because Invincible was essentially just Superman, but it works. He works really well for Spider-Man, and I tried number 1, and I thought it was great, but I just don't have enough room in my life for Spider-Man on top of X-Men and everything else. But the other person I pointed out was Warren Ellis, because I'm a sucker, and I basically got hooked on Warren Ellis because of his book that he did called Ruins, which is a book that came out actually in the early 90s, but I found out about it right when I was getting into comics, and I don't remember what turned me onto it, other than I think I liked another book that Ellis had done for the Ultimate Comics run of that Marvel did for a while, and I think he did Ultimate Fantastic Four or something. I'm probably wrong. Somebody out there, please correct me. But Warren Ellis did an Ultimate book, and I was like, oh, what else has this guy done? And I saw this book called Ruins. And the idea of Ruins is a 2-issue miniseries that it came out in 1995. And it's what if Marvel superheroes were actually created by like the realistic versions of the things that give them powers, right? Like the Fantastic Four are still the Fantastic Four, but Johnny Blaze is constantly in agony because he's on fire and he can't turn it off. Or when Reed Richards stretches out, like he has to physically retract himself in order to basically shrink down, like a Stretch Armstrong where you kind of stretch it out and it doesn't just retract immediately. It like takes time to go back. What if the Hulk was this massive irradiated flesh that constantly healed itself but was like ever growing like cancer would? It's all these messed up versions of the Marvel superheroes, and for some reason Marvel published this in the 90s because that's where we were. And I read that and I was just like, oh shit, this is some dark stuff. And then I really started to get into Warren Ellis's works, which drove me over to like Avatar Press, where he did some very fucking bizarro Alan Moore-esque stuff that wasn't all good, but like was interesting. And I remember hearing about this book that he had coming out from Avatar called No Hero, and I got really into that because it was super dark and it was another twist on superheroes, because for some reason when I got into comics, I really didn't want to read a lot of superhero books. I just wanted to read like twists on superheroes. So I was really into Superman Red Sun. I was really into Marvel 1602. I was like all of these twists on superheroes, but not the actual superhero comics themselves.
You're like the M. Night Shyamalan of comic book readership.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. But yeah, the series Ruins is a parody of Marvel's, which is funny enough. But yeah, so I would highly suggest people check it out because it's crazy. It's really dark and messed up, and if you're into that, go for it. But Warren Ellis basically got me hooked on like really out there stuff, and I got into his Global Frequency and Orbital and a bunch of other independent books. And I started reading The Authority, and I finally read I finally read Planetary recently, like in the last year. And I really want to get into Stormwatch. I know, Nick, you've got a lot to say about that. And The Authority is also something I want to try that Ellis worked on, as well as a handful of other creators. So, yeah, it's all that stuff. I'm still digging back through, but Warren Ellis is my go-to. Like, I know he's doing something weird, I might as well read it, which is why I'm collecting the issues of Trees that are coming out, but I haven't read any of them yet because I want to reread the whole series because it's been coming out for so long. So, yeah, I got a lot of feelings about Warren Ellis, and I both love and hate him sometimes. So, yeah, I don't know if you guys had any other questions for me, because I will just rant for another 10 minutes if you'd like. But I think we can probably wrap the show up here. You can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Tia at Portrait of Madame X, spelled the cool French way. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where we post comic news and art and sass and all sorts of other things when I get a chance to jump on Twitter.
This show is powered by fans like you on Patreon. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Join now for access to exclusive audio, articles, previews of the IRCB schedule, early access to our top of my pile posts, and more. We also have a Goodreads group, which is a lovely community of comic friends. You could join our yearly reading challenge and comment on our weekly threads. Check it out at ircbpodcast.com/Goodreads. And speaking of ircbpodcast.com, check it out for our pronunciation guide, where we're definitely going to add Maria Llovett, something. I'm going to ask her.
Llovett, yeah.
Discord server is on there. We have our zines, merch, everything else IRCB, ircbpodcast.com.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show. 5 stars would be fantastic over on iTunes and beyond, and we will read your review on the next episode. Please email the show with what you've been reading, recipes, corrections. Tell me about how I'm wrong for not having read Old Man Logan. You can do that over at ircbpodcast@gmail.com.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for our show. We can't thank them enough for letting us use their music. Xander is the coolest guy, the friendliest guy, the huggiest guy. He's also a wizard and edits the show. Thank you, Xander, for your time. And I want to say thank you to Tia and Nick and all you wonderful listeners out there and all the people out on the Discord who have conversations with us about The Mandalorian, because we're constantly talking about it. Thank you guys for listening to the show and being amazing fans. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.